Gaming is dying, not in sales or in popularity, but in value. There are 4 things that are eating gaming from the inside out. Games like Jedi Survivor, Halo Infinite, Cyberpunk, and the Call of Duty franchise are examples of all of these issues. Not all of this though is caused by publishers that many of us hate like Ubisoft or EA. However, they definitely indulge into at least one of these things and do so painfully. We have games such as Call of Duty Cold War, Forspoken, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and Overwatch 2. These are all modern day examples of games that have crashed and burned due to the state of them at launch, or they are not games made for the player. Gaming used to be fueled by pure passion and care even from the giants in this industry. From games series like Metal Gear, Elder Scrolls and Red Dead Redemption being genuine examples of games being made with love. Sadly though, this is lost in today's world, however we do have some gems still existing. So let's discuss the 4 reasons gaming is dying. This video in a way is the true sequel to my Is Gaming Dying video, and bringing to light the topics that we all know are damaging games in general. In that video, I discussed how I was feeling at the time when it came to the world of games, and how I felt based off the most recent examples of games being released. I spoke about how I loved gaming when I was younger, and that a part of this issue might be down to us growing up, which is an idea that I've expanded on in my Is Gaming Art video. Within that video, I came to the conclusion that with growing up, I started to become more cynical and think more in depth towards the small details, which in comparison to when I was a kid playing something like Animal Crossing City Folk, Minecraft, or Metal Gear Sons of Liberty, which are all games that definitely have flaws within them, especially based off the modern day standard of games, but a lot of us become way more unhappy with nowadays than we were when we were a kid. One of the big ones today is that games have to be 60 FPS, which I think is an insane concept to have for every game out there. With only indie titles being some of the games that are able to get away with this, even if new games from big publishers have massively ambitious scopes and great concepts, with ideas that are absolutely amazing. However, because it's not 60 FPS, people start to stir up a fuss just before launch and complain about it all day. Whereas when we were kids, we didn't care about the quality of the image, or how many frames a second a game was running at. Outside of this, I touched on the topic that I'll be discussing and expanding on within this video. I don't think that I'm being too cynical of the space, or need to disconnect myself from the games and need to just stop caring about them, which is what a lot of people told me to do. So all of this comes from a place of love. I'm simply someone who has got to a point where I'm no longer happy with the modern day state of games, and more in particular, AAA titles. But I won't make you walk away from this video with pure disappointment for the future, as that is not what I think. So sit down, grab a cup of tea and some biscuits, and I mean proper biscuits, not scones that you guys have over in the US. I don't understand why you guys call scones biscuits, it just makes no sense. And then you have cookies, like there's big cookies, then there's biscuits, and then there's scones. They're different things, okay? But join me in this video, which is a thing that I'm genuinely really passionate about within the space of gaming, as it affects everyone, and at times can be really scummy towards us as the consumers. Many of the developers working on games that they loved, but are bottlenecked by many companies. Now, if you do enjoy long-form content like this, and talking about more niche things and kind of delving deeper into these sorts of topics, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video, and it will get out there for others to see. And if you want to see videos like this a week earlier from launch, then make sure to go check out my Patreon, where you'll get access to that and much more, such as a say in the future content coming out on this channel, behind the scenes on creating videos like this, and active Q&As. And lastly, if you want to support any further and are in need of some new lovely wallets, then make sure to go check out minimaldesigns.com below, which is my company personally. So if you did want to and you wanted to grab a slimline wallet, then make sure to go check it out, as it is great quality. I'm absolutely in love with mine personally. But yeah, let's jump back into this video. One of the issues that I have with gaming is the extreme greed that many companies have within the industry. From the likes of Bungie charging you £30 to £40 for this new DLC that in a year's time they're going to make free anyway and then cut content from, all the way through to the likes of Activision, who are charging £70 for the new Call of Duty release and then ramming in microtransactions and battle passes on top of it. All of this is done because of greed and wanting everything out of you and bleeding you dry until eventually there is enough backlash to their product to go against this. An example of this, I would say, is what Ubisoft are facing right now, which was burning their core audience around Assassin's Creed with the last set of releases, and now they're making a game to try and appease these fans and try and keep them in, and not only are they doing this, they're also undercharging this product in comparison to any of their competition. Then my next issue with gaming is the current quality of games being unfinished on launch, and we now have a few examples of this happening that it's starting to create the issue and question of why is this becoming so common. Most recent examples of this are the likes of Forspoken, Jedi Survivor, and Pokemon Arceus. Which doesn't mean all of these games are absolute trash, you know, outside of Spoken, I'd definitely say that, but all of them being released with issues anywhere from frame drop, lack of overall content, just poor gameplay quality from the storyline, the voice acting to the world design, and it just becomes a bit much for the average consumer. Which has now got to a point where you're getting a lot of valid criticism towards games that shouldn't have been released this early on launch, and are being marketed to be, in a way, bigger and better than any of the previous AAA titles out there, when in reality, they could probably be maybe AA, or even bordering indie level-esque of games. However, on the other end of valid criticism, you have extreme criticism, which is something I spoke about briefly a moment ago. This is an issue where maybe at large we're just being more critical, or it could be a big thing around everyone feeling as if their take matters. Which, I know, it's quite pretentious of me to be saying this as a guy who sat here asking you to watch a video that's probably more than 45 minutes long, but please stay with me here. There are plenty of videos out here where people are critiquing games and making very valid points, but many people will gain a full opinion on a game and maybe even consider never playing the game in the first place because their favorite creators say that it's not good because of some small issue of the game, or it could even be that there is genuine issues with the game, but you're never going to try it out, and overall you could actually genuinely love this thing. Like, if you consider what a lot of us loved when we were younger, a lot of those games have flaws. I'm someone who loves Skyrim, I'm very open about it, however I'm very aware there is flaws to the game. A perfect example of this was Jedi Survivor, which yes, should have had a couple of extra weeks, all the way through to maybe even an extra month to polish off, but the amount of people who are trying to rip into this game and trying to make it as if it was completely awful, when in fact the game is really great, but because it had FPS issues that were unsustainable, it made it complete trash. So because of small issues, it ends up making a lot of people feel as if they just shouldn't play the game in the first place. And lastly, one of the biggest issues that I have with the gaming landscape is the lack of change. Not a lack of innovation from a technical perspective, as they are two very different things and a lot of people try to unify them. Over the last decade though, we've either been getting sequels to previous games that are beloved, remasters to games we love, or games that are effectively cousins to games we love. So none of them are trying to make something truly new. They stick to their big guns and can't let go of anything that might be dying because it's the one thing that's keeping their companies afloat, or is at least keeping a lot of their profit margins available. I love games, but sadly these four things have poisoned the industry. From the way that some creators have accumulated an audience of mindless cynics towards every small thing, which has created the YouTube version of doom scrolling, to the lack of care of giants in the industry and destroying the franchises that we once loved. So let's talk about these issues, and also I'm going to be discussing some of the great examples of pieces of media that we've been getting within the gaming world that are fighting against this poison. So let's jump into why greed is such a bad thing within games, like, you know, who would have thought, and how it's destroyed our favourite franchises and some of our favourite games out there. So I think what we need to do first is describe what is and isn't greedy, in my opinion anyway, within games. So a game that I would say wasn't greedy was Red Dead Redemption 2, which is an example of a game that many would have paid way more than even the £60 on release that it sold for. We ended up getting an amazing story, a great world, and a beautiful looking game with one of the best characters within gaming. However, one of the biggest controversies surrounding this game was RDR Online, which supposedly was down to the factor that they wanted to, you know, focus on GTA 5 and GTA 6, which personally I don't buy too much as their reasoning. Personally, I think that they just cancelled RDR Online solely because it didn't have a good enough ROI, and simply put, wasn't as successful as they thought it would be in comparison to something like GTA Online, so they ended up just canning it instead and giving you small updates every now and again. The game though is superb, and isn't trying to take your money out of your bank account every single minute like many other games out there. What I would consider a greedy game though is Modern Warfare 2. This game was released at £70. Now obviously they don't walk away with all of that money, and they need to find a way of getting the maintenance costs in there for the servers. However, for this game to be made in the first place, it cost them $250 million, and they made within the first 3 days of launch 800 million. So they made back way more than they spent on this game anyway, and they were already aware of this as it's the new Call of Duty. They very rarely end up having any issues. So instead of, taking on that little bit of price that they would normally have done anyway, they decided to make every single average player and average consumer pay the extra £10 for release of this title. You might be able to tell that I do have a slight issue with games being £70, but what I think is a bigger issue on top of this, and why I'm calling it greedy, is the battle passes and microtransactions that get rammed in your face at any moment they can find to try and make you buy this thing. They end up trying to make you pay even more than you've already paid with half a shift's worth of work, which has come to the conclusion of every single player out there that Activision are blatantly greedy and don't really care about much else, and it's accumulated a load of practices that are trying to rinse people dry of every single last bit of money. Examples of greedy games, in my opinion, are the likes of just generally the more recent Call of Duties, Halo Infinite, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Overwatch 2. You might see all of those examples are from the realm of AAA developers, and that is because these issues are way more prominent within this realm and have way more limelight on them. However, also simply put, most indie titles pretty much cannot get away with charging £70 for their game. It's as simple as that. Those sorts of titles can't get away with it because they don't have the mass marketing to do so in the first place. Let me expand on all of these for you. Call of Duty is already one that I've kind of gone over just then, so I'm going to just skip straight to Halo Infinite, which is one of the biggest letdowns in the history of games, and definitely the biggest letdown in the FPS genre. This game launched with a free-to-play multiplayer, but the campaign was released at the price of £60, with the promise that there'd be new story content, new multiplayer maps regularly, with new weapons being added and new modes to the game. Oh yeah, and also the Forge that wasn't released until 11 months after launch when they said it would be there with the game. So by the time that even that was added, they ended up losing 99% of their player base due to just the stale content flow into it, which I'll dive a little bit deeper into when I talk about the unfinished section of games. But for now, the reason why I say this is greed is that they not only charged people £60 for a product that never really got fulfilled on, but on top of that, they also decided to try and make people pay out more money for microtransactions and battle passes. So not only did they shill to you buying a game that wasn't fully fulfilled on the extra content, or even having the game in the first place that was where it should be, they chose to, on top of that, strip back Halo's customization options to try and make a quick buck. They made it so that you could hardly change anything about your character's appearance to make them look cool, that you ended up having to pay them $10 to have a helmet that makes you look like you just changed your war paint on Skyrim. So they chose to do this for the sake of making money in the new economy of gaming, with rampant unethical ways to try and get you to buy new things with zero value that even look mediocre. Going from the same franchise that only a decade ago was only charging you the price of a game to play Halo Reach that had amazing customization options, to now charging you $10 that you could get some shiny new boots that back when you were playing Halo Reach you would have just got perfectly for free. Which has left a game that at one point had 250,000 players on Steam to now getting only 4,000 players a day. Next up on my chopping block is a game that I've spoken about many times before, and I'll give you a little bit more information about now, which is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now this game is the worst of the worst when it comes to what people view as what Ubisoft have done to the single-player gaming market. For starters, before the game was even launched, it was marketed completely wrong. From a return to stealth, trying to win back the old fans of the franchise, then in fact, they weren't able to accomplish. Technically, they did bring in some stealth aspects and also some more Assassin's Creed moments. It was definitely more of that way than, let's say, the likes of Odyssey. However, this game's closest moments to genuinely being an Assassin's Creed title was when you were just running around the training moments when you're getting the hidden blade in the first place. Past that, being an assassin and even being stealthy in this game is practically useless and non-existent. However, on top of this, before launch they said that they weren't going to have XP boosters within this game or material boosters, which they had within the likes of Odyssey and Origins. However, they waited just 1 month for all the good pats on the back for not adding them in, to then just go in and just shove them all in there anyway. Now, on top of this, you also had microtransactions in a single player game to make your character that no one else is going to see outside of you and maybe someone you're going to show the game to look better. Like, in my opinion, there's just no point. Then they also added DLC to this game, which I'm not anti-DLC, it's more the fact that if you bought all of these things separately, you would have been charged £80 for content that doesn't even come close to matching the bloated fest of a game that is the original title that was sold to you for £60. Now, to their credit, you did have a season pass option, which would have meant instead of £80, you would have only spent £68, for all 3 DLCs. Great savings. So they had a game that wasn't fully what they were selling, microtransactions for making your horse look like a unicorn, or having your character look slightly better, XP boosters when they said they weren't going to add them into the game in the first place, and DLC totaling almost £70. Which proves to be even less than half of what you're getting if you were going full completionist mode on all of the content. And then the final cherry on top is that it's just a bad game in comparison to what it wanted to be, which was The Witcher 3. Like, if anyone who tries to dispute that point, just go watch Ubisoft's entire point around the success of The Witcher and why they cared about this game and why they went down the RPG route. Like, it is the most blaringly obvious thing that they wanted this game to be The Witcher 3. They just weren't able to pull it off. Then the last one on this list is Overwatch 2, which summarizes as followed. They launched a second game that was literally just so that they could push their players into a new marketplace, with a battle pass that was mediocre with the skins that you were getting, with characters that were hidden then behind paywalls of seasons, but the main issue that a lot of people had with this was the almost impossible ability for players to even get skins normally. With people calculating that overall you would have to play this game for 300 years worth of time to even get every single skin in the game, which is literally absurd. So instead, pay the money for it and accept being screwed by Blizzard. With all of these titles that I've just mentioned, on top of that, many others out there, has just created a massive distrust that the average player and consumer has with a lot of these big companies. And it ends up making you come to the conclusion that pretty much none of these companies really care about the mind of the player more than they just care about the fact that the game is slightly profitable and makes kids beg their parents for credit cards. They are a business and they're going to put money first, and that's obvious. But if they were to actually go out of their way to make a good game, then it would be fine. So instead of making a good game, they choose to make mediocre games at best, ram them with as many methods as possible to bleed you dry of your money, from the core fans especially, all the way through to the casuals who just find that one thing that looks cool, or like I said, kids who are jumping on these games and end up begging their parents for the new skins. This has led to the likes of Ubisoft now having to try and reclaim back their core fan base with a game like Assassin's Creed Mirage. A game that is being sold on being a return to form, but is built completely within the realms of the Assassin's Creed Valhalla engine and originally was meant to be a DLC for the same game. They've clearly seen something that's made them want to prioritize keeping their fans and keeping the original formula of the games with the linear storytelling. On top of that, the surprise undercutting of the market coming in at £50 instead of £70, and that you can even get for cheaper on something like CD keys at £30. Now, the reason that it's gone to this point where many companies are going down the extremely greedy route is down to two main reasons. One is that the main focus for many of these games coming out is purely from a financial perspective. Yes, these games are being made from big companies, so they're going to be caring about it, but they shouldn't be putting all of their effort into trying to figure out new ways of ripping away money from you as the primary intender for why the game is coming out. The reason the game should be making money in the first place is because it is a genuinely good game first. Then guess what? People are going to buy whatever else you give them because you've given them a good product as well. However, one of the biggest issues within many of these companies is they're run by people who are just a bit too old and they only know what games are cool because of their grandkids and what they're playing. They don't end up respecting that games are an actual art form and should be cultivated properly. And the other is that they're normally run by people with corrupted moral compasses, like the Guillemot family when it comes to Ubisoft having to put their whole family tree into the company, which means that they have complete control and nobody can make it run any differently. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a few examples of games being unfinished, and even a game that I love like Skyrim being one of the games that people rip into for being unfinished, which is completely fair. But the reason why this is becoming such an issue now is that it's a more prominent thing, and as well, people are just not getting what they're paying for. And maybe even sometimes you're not paying up front for something, but a company makes money for you just being and playing the game because it entices you to spend more money later on. Now, a big example of this is Halo Infinite, for the issue of live service roadmaps for a game that's content on the roadmap was simply what was promised at launch. But then the other one that is the most prominent and well-known issue was Cyberpunk. What unfinished games cause is a massive lack in trust moving forward, mainly around the idea of competency. However, I would say the reason this is such an issue now is in fact that it makes fans feel as if they can't buy into any form of hype anymore. Hype really helps build a game's release and can even make a game even better than it was for many players out there, as there's a lot of excitement for a new game. But due to recent examples of games just being released a little bit too early out of the oven, poor PC ports, unplayable games in general, and with games like Assassin's Creed Unity's launch absolutely terrifying children, we've got to the point where the average player doesn't want to even get hyped for anything anymore, as we've been burnt way too many times. This is what I would call the gamer's version of trust issues within a relationship. We paint absolutely everything with the same brush because we're too scared of being hurt once again, with the likes of something like Cyberpunk completely destroying most people's faith in the idea of even being hyped for a game's launch at all. The most prominent examples that I mentioned a second ago is Cyberpunk and Halo Infinite. As I've already discussed Halo Infinite a bit earlier on, I'm going to discuss Cyberpunk first. The game that was meant to be the second coming of Jesus, some might have said. We all know what happened with this game, but I think what we need to talk about when it comes to this game overall is twofold. One is the terrible decision to push this game out earlier, and the second one was oversharing as a company and giving fans way too much of a desire for what was going to be in the game and fundamentally wasn't on launch, and even some bits of it aren't now. Obviously they went on to fix some of these issues, but that doesn't justify a poor release. Similar to how for me, no matter how many times I get told No Man's Sky is a great game now, it will always have a bad taste in my mouth for its release that you could argue was bordering, if not was a scam on launch. However, with Cyberpunk, obviously they have actually got a lot of things right now and they've fixed many of the issues. Then you have the other side of the spectrum where Halo Infinite has now been out for 2 years and still doesn't have everything that was promised. You can go check out videos from the likes of the Axeman, who's done a great job at just giving an overall timeline of all of the events around this, but I think the best thing to do for this discussion is talk about roadmaps, which by itself isn't inherently bad. I would love a game to come out that is fully functioning well with a roadmap for loads of extra content. That would be great. For example, a game like Valhalla with all of its DLCs, if the DLCs were cheaper and the game was overall a better game, I probably wouldn't have as much contempt for it as I do. I genuinely think their roadmap, if the game was all round not a bloated mess, would have worked out way better for them when it comes to the eyes of what the average player views Ubisoft titles now. But the biggest issue with many roadmaps out there is they are nothing more than just let's fix the game or let's fulfill on the promises that we said the game would be on launch. It seems to be nothing more than just trying to fix mistakes instead of actually giving you extra content. So why are games now being released like this? Well, the most obvious answer is that they're just being pushed out too early, but what would I actually say is the most pivotal part as to this reason? I think it is down to a few different things. The 3 key things that I think make a game like Cyberpunk happen are the following, as they all end up building this concoction that are just dooming your game to fail even if it releases in a good state. The first of which I would say is that most companies are just looking after their shareholders first and foremost, which makes sense. They are a business, so it's not something that I'm absolutely going to condemn them for, but it is overall something that is affecting the industry. But I would say the other issue, which kind of is a part of just companies in general, is that they're just a bit too big and they either lie outright or they're just overly ambitious or overpromise in general. That's typically what it is, especially if they're a smaller company. So let's say they are like a studio of like 50 to less than that, and they release a game that's just nowhere near what it was. They were typically either overly ambitious, overpromised, or just fundamentally lied anyway. So overall, it does make sense for why they want to hit deadlines and be safe with the games they're releasing. So again, it's not something that I'm absolutely anti, but I do wish that some of them had the guts to, try and actually make something new and interesting. The other, in my opinion, is just overpromising to the fan base with the likes of 343 with Halo and CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk. But the last one is down to, in my opinion, the heads of studios promising their publishers that a game will be complete, so in turn they end up overworking their dev teams into cutting corners in development. I see a lot of people try and blame just the publishers for all of these issues, but I think a game like Destiny 2 is a good example of why this isn't always the case. For ages under Activision, many people were trying to blame them for why Bungie was being greedier with their tactics by pushing microtransactions down your throat at any given opportunity and hiking up the prices of DLC. Then after that, they broke their contract, and it turns out nothing changed, and if anything, the microtransactions became even more prominent, which is an issue that I do find that I think a lot of people don't also take into account how much it does cost to run a game. Like, I am anti, generally, the likes of Call of Duty, for example, ramming in as many microtransactions and everything to make as much money all the time and trying to do different tactics like mobile games will to try and entice you to buy in. I do think those are big issues, but for the likes of something like Destiny, when they are now just a studio making their game, yeah, they're now owned by PlayStation, but back when they weren't, they needed to stay afloat. And this is the reason why some of these companies do just rely on microtransactions to try and do so. However, what I do think is actually the core issue within the reason why pretty much everything like this happens is just down to communication. Anyone who's worked within sales or has played a game of Counter-Strike will understand what I mean by this, which is if you do not communicate with your team properly, you will most likely, 99% of the time, fail. Companies have a massive communication issue, from dev teams being asked to make things within a time frame that simply can't be done, and others believing way more in their abilities than what they're actually capable of, which all trickles down to the consumer and the communication given out to us to inform us on whether or not a game is right for us even if we want to buy it in the first place. However, one big thing that I think often gets overlooked when it comes to games, and you'll hear this statement all the time, which is back in my day, when games were released, they were always finished and they were always complete and they never needed an update. Which is, definitely a true statement. Most games that back then were able to do that, and that's because, releases weren't able to just be updated as easily. However, this also is down to the sheer scope of the difference of a new average game than what you used to get back then. The average AAA game needs to be great. That is pretty much how the standard has been set now, and that's what a lot of people perceive as it needing to be. But when you have games like Metal Gear Sons of Liberty releasing for the first time back in, I forgot when, it's the early 2000s, it revolutionized the stealth genre overall. And from a pure comparison standpoint of technicals, you simply cannot compare Sons of Liberty to even something like GTA 4 to GTA 5's development to something like GTA 6's development and what that looks like inside of Rockstar, or what The Last of Us 2 was like, or even what Red Dead was looking like. None of them are actually comparable, so I find the point of, well, back in the early 2000s, every game was released finished because they had no other option than to release the game finished. That is fine up until you get to the bottleneck of why a lot of games get released and they aren't completely done, they are buggy messes, is because the sheer scope of a game, it is very hard to get close to perfection, and a lot of people would rather have a game out that's 98% done than 100% done because they're constantly looking and nitpicking at every small detail to make it perfect. All round, the reason why I think unfinished titles are plaguing modern day games is because we're losing faith in the studios. This has brought us to a point where we no longer trust even the gameplay trailers. People buy on release, that's definitely still a thing. However, there is definitely a massive thing around the idea of people not getting hyped for games and how we should be massively skeptical of everything, and all of this has only come because of unfinished products. And on top of that, the issue of just malicious marketing, and I'd say overly just extreme criticism, which is the next topic. But I find that a lot of this comes down to the fact that we just simply have been burnt so many times so that we now no longer want to be hyped for something, which is a massive issue within games, and people don't want to admit this. Because, for example, a lot of people, when they think about going to a concert, they will have fond memories of it, but a lot of people will say they were more hyped for the concert than they were actually excited for the experience of going, because normally the thrill of an expectation is the driving factor to why people want to go do something and love doing something. So when you aren't hyped for a game and you get it, yeah, it's a delightful surprise. But when you are hyped for a game and it's as good as you are hoping it to be, that's just another level of just enjoyment all round, in comparison to, obviously the other end of that, which is you get overhyped for a game and then it's absolute trash, then, that is the issue. So overall, anticipation is a big thing. And this is all basically an issue because of unfinished products. That's as best as it can go down to, and the greed of many of these companies. And this all breaks down and slowly destroys what is the hype train for any release.
Do the roar. Do it.
We also need to accept, to an extent, that we are to blame for the state of gaming. We are the consumer and we are also the critics. But back before the world of YouTube, people might have complained about their games to their friends, or they would have found a forum to talk about and rant on. However, it wasn't to anywhere near the same scale as it is today. I'm a good example of this, and I won't hide away from the fact that this video is a sequel to my Is Gaming Dying video, which, when I released it, fundamentally at the time I believed everything I was saying in that video. Maybe now, looking back on it, there is some things that I would disagree with. However, for the most part, I ended up learning more about other people's perspectives on that video, and that was kind of the best thing that came from it. But the reason why I mention this is that this channel went from being 450 subscribers to then taking me to 8k, I believe, after that one video, and then over time I'm slowly gaining and gaining more. And this is all because, realistically, I had gone into that bit more cynical route. It was a video that was kind of off the top of my head, just scripting a video, and it didn't take me too long to do. It wasn't something that was necessarily built to build into the algorithm, as some people might think. It was literally just some of my thoughts on games, and all round, because of me being cynical, I could have delved even deeper into that trap of just making more just negative content all round. With the world of 2005, you were able to complain about the new game, but most people weren't online looking for this sort of content, and algorithms hadn't got to the same stage that they're at right now, knowing that outrage culture will just garner a longer time on the platform at mass than anything positive. Now, what I class as extreme criticism is people complaining for the sake of it, or not acknowledging any form of the benefits, and just being extremely cynical of something without massive reason about it. Like, for example, I've openly said many times, and I've said about it in this video, I'm anti-Assassin's Creed Valhalla. However, I give the game that it does look amazing. The first 30 hours are actually quite good. The gameplay loop is really good for that first 30 hours. Then after that, it drops off a cliff because you start then questioning, when is this game going to end? And it turns out you're only halfway through. So I am aware that there is good elements to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. However, for me, the negatives vastly outweigh the positives. One of the biggest examples, though, of criticism that I've seen online that I just find really weird is how some creators out here will just talk about how they're very skeptical and they don't like how Starfield looks based off of the gameplay that we've been shown, but then are really hopeful and are really just getting more and more just interested for the new Assassin's Creed when all we've been shown is literally no gameplay trailer for one, and is like a 5-second clip that is on Reddit. That's all we've been shown, and it's in 480p. Like, who cares? Why are people hyping up Assassin's Creed Mirage but then trying to just completely just trash Starfield at the same time? It seems more like a bias towards Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed, and just an extremely critical take on the overall opinion of Bethesda. I do heavily correlate this entire issue with YouTube, though. You could argue that with the internet becoming bigger and bigger, it was inevitable, but I think YouTube, as it is the platform where almost all of the discourse around games happens, this is the one that I'm going to stick to for this conversation. With the rise of YouTube being a platform for anyone to speak their mind about anything, we saw a massive rise in gaming, and at the same time you had Minecraft and YouTube building up at the same time, hand in hand with each other. Both were a massive reason for each other's success. However, the reason that we ended up coming to this platform is relatability, which is great. However, relatability is a very slippery slope towards only finding people that you agree with, especially in the context of creators and your favorite games. Which means when you find that person who says the right thing that you agree with, or they convey a point to you that you somewhat agree with, or they've just said it in the right tone or right way, you end up trusting them way more than just the random person that gives a take on a game that you completely disagree with, even though they could be giving valid criticism. With games though, this has meant that not only does YouTube thrive off of negativity, but the echo chambers aspect within it that we all love and hate at the same time, because as much as we all do hate echo chambers for the fact that, you know, people end up being swayed too much and get radicalized by their opinions, also it means that we get fed the content that we kind of want to watch. But this does lead to the issue of you kind of only trust some people's opinions online, meaning that when our favorite content creator tells us that a game is bad, we end up just believing them wholeheartedly and not really having a reason to play the game after that. Slowly though, this adds up from many different creators maybe that you watch who say some things that are bad about a game's release, and this ends up just building to you just having a negative take on a game's release. However, the truly bad side of this is when people are just being cynical for the sake of it, especially when they know that what they're doing is going to get them tons of views and clicks just because they're giving hot takes that are hot takes because typically they are just very wrong. I will just be honest. Like, for example, the amount of people, and I guarantee there is channels out there who have cultivated an audience saying the likes of The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, and Red Dead 2 are not good games, because the amount of people on my Open Worlds video who told me all three of those games aren't actually that good, I guarantee you there is channels out there who have cultivated an audience by saying they aren't good games, which just means that fundamentally, they want to stand out, they want to be different and edgy. That's all it comes across as. As there will always be a small subsect of players who think that games like those are trash. However, they're just going to end up going to people who they kind of agree with. They're going to go to the people who say that The Witcher 3 is a terrible game, even though it's one of the best open world games, RPG games, overall fantasy games to ever come out. But all round, they'll say it's bad because it gets them views, it'll get them subs, and it'll gain them an audience of rabid fans. Overall, when it comes to the issue of extreme criticism, I think it comes down to just everyone delving a bit too deep into the weeds of the technicals and not caring about how a game makes you feel, which is something that I spoke on in my Is Gaming Art video, and I'll discuss a little bit briefly here, which pretty much goes down the lines of talking about how, for example, you shouldn't care about every single small technical aspect of why you should or shouldn't enjoy a game. So for example, a lot of people will complain about their FPS not being 60, the graphics not being up to scratch to what you expected, the gameplay loop being a little bit weak, or the game having a couple bugs here and there, and overall they just kind of don't think about how a game might make you feel. They'll only go with, well, the game launched at 30 FPS even though all these other things are quite good, but it's 30 FPS so I don't like it. It's just a bad take to have. You're better off playing a game, seeing if you enjoy it. Yes, the FPS might bug you if it's frame drops like when the new Star Wars game released, and there was actually frame drop issues that made me have to just cheese my methods around certain parts of the game because it was that bad. Overall, there is a lot of games out there. Take the new Zelda game. That game has come out. A lot of people are complaining that it's not 60 FPS, but oh wait, a load of people love it. It's just the fact that we need to care more about how a game makes you feel than just the technical aspects of, oh well, the game is not 60 FPS, the graphics are not 4K, and I can't run my PC that's $5,000 that no one actually owns on average, because literally the average player doesn't have enough money to spend that amount of money on the thing. Like, to me, it just seems like being overly critical of something when it doesn't really affect most players. The conclusion of that video was that we've just become more cynical as we grew older, and with that point, it mainly focused around when we were younger, we had more of an imagination that was able to fill the gaps of pretty much everything that meant that we weren't being immersed. So if a game dropped in FPS, we didn't really notice because we didn't care about what FPS was. If the game's graphics weren't great, I guarantee you in your head, you remember those gameplay graphics being so much better than what they actually are, because our little brains were able to fire off a load of cool ideas, create gaps in our memory, and just solve a lot of the issues. And even then, just solve the issues of when we were playing the games, because fundamentally, we didn't care about it. Once we became older, we started to care way more about the smaller details. Which, yes, if there is FPS issues, for example, take the new Star Wars game like I mentioned, yeah, that should be called out. However, if a title launches at 30 FPS, or has the option of 60 but it doesn't run smoothly, but you can run it in 30 and it runs fine, I don't see why that should discourage you from wanting to play the game and actually enjoying the game. And one thing that I heard many times in the video that I made was that people would say many kids are still loving games, therefore my take is incorrect. and I kind of half agree with it. I think there is a place to be critical of games, as long as you are being constructive with that. So for example, a creator that I think does a good job of this is Luke Stevens. He talks about this many times, and he's very critical of many different games. However, he always offers and provides alternatives to how they should have been done in the first place within many of his critiques. There is a difference between giving constructive criticism and being overly cynical about something, or even just being extremely cynical about everything just because it can get you views. Change is something that is really hard to deal with within entertainment, and really generally within life. Because the issue is that change can either go in one of two directions, which is either good or bad. Which within this entertainment industry, there is a lack of it in general. We rarely see genuine change, and the best example of change, I think, is the Assassin's Creed franchise. Don't worry, I'm not going to completely slate everything, as if I take you back to 2015 when Assassin's Creed Syndicate came out and Ubisoft and everyone at large within the community realised change needed to happen. The formula had become stale. And a couple years after that, the release of Assassin's Creed Origins came out. The game at the time was loved by almost every single member of the fanbase, and you would rarely see anything negative about it on YouTube, and generally anywhere. It's only within the last 2 years that I've seen a lot of people start to say that the game is either complete trash because they think it's bad, or it's because it was the first RPG Assassin's Creed game that led to Odyssey and Valhalla. I'll go into depth in a video soon about why I think the latter is an awful way of thinking about everything about that game, and that is going to be reserved for my video that is going to be in the works very soon, so don't worry, I've seen a couple comments of people asking me about it. My In Defense of Assassin's Creed Origins video will come out probably in like the next month or so. At the time of Origins release, almost every single creator that you could see was agreeing that it was a great taste of fresh air that we needed. But once the years went by, we ended up getting the likes of Odyssey that went fully off the cliff for the avid Assassin's Creed fan out there, and they tried to climb back up with the likes of Valhalla. However, it fell flat on its face, as it was nothing more than just awful and spitting in the face of your general Assassin's Creed fan. Which means the game that started all of this now gets viewed as the bad guy in this situation, when in reality it was that Ubisoft chose to chase the money of The Witcher 3's success. Now the issue around this change is that you ended up alienating a load of the fans, and this completely blows away any idea of many companies out there wanting to even scratch the idea of just changing their game's formula, because why would they risk losing their fans, who are fundamentally going to be the ones who keep buying their games in the long run, which has led to a lot of games over the last decade either being sequels to the same sort of game or just remakes. With the likes of the entire Assassin's Creed franchise up until Origins, and then doubling down after that again. Games like Dead Space, Last of Us 1, Link's Awakening, and Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were all games that brought these original games to the forefront once again, but fundamentally they were built off of ideas that came way before, because they knew that it would make them good money. Which isn't always a bad thing, I'm not going to say that it is. And the endless sequels that we end up getting, we end up having some hits such as Assassin's Creed 2, RDR2, Arkham City, and then I've even heard good things when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom as well, and then you've got some misses out there such as SimCity, Halo 5, to some Fallout 4, and then Crackdown 3. Sure, you could just say this is just the world of game development now, but why is it so rare that we see anything new? Gaming is meant to be one of the best forms of media to tell a vast array of stories that makes it so unique for the player experience, but we end up just getting a load of the same game. The reason that it's got to this point though is down to two primary things. One is corporatization and globalization of gaming, and the other is the average customer. The first reason I mentioned earlier, which is the average game studio has a lot of bills to pay, from the people cleaning the dev team offices all the way up to the CEOs of the company. But most importantly, for a lot of these companies out there, they have their shareholders to pay, as these are fundamentally the people that have a lot of money in the company and are taking a massive risk with these companies. They could end up losing a ton of their money, so companies don't don't want to risk losing other people their money by changing the formula because, some people out there want it to change. Look at Assassin's Creed. This is a good example. Sure, you're getting Mirage, which if you take Ubisoft at their word is going back to the root of the franchise, but outside of that, the next 4 games are all going to be open world RPG games. They've pretty much confirmed, I think, that the 2 of them or 3 of them are, and then the next one probably will be as well. So all in all, yeah, they're only really doing it just to kind of appease people, in my opinion, and then they're just going back to the same thing. I'm fine if they do that and they want to release an Assassin's Creed like linear story game every few years, that's fine with me. But overall, I don't think anyone should look at it as any different than that. The reason for this though is that they know they can financially sustain losing the core fan base. For the money that they were able to bring in with the likes of Assassin's Creed Valhalla made them over $1 billion. So why exactly would they care tons about satisfying the original fan base? The other issue, like I mentioned, is the average consumer, which isn't us, sadly. Now I know that there are a lot of people online and we kind of like to think that we are like the average person's thoughts and the average person opinion, but fundamentally we just aren't. We are way more in the weeds of this than most people are. If you're sat here watching a video essay this far into it, you're probably not the average player. The average player is chilling, playing Call of Duty one evening, jumping on a new single player game that's just come out every now and again, but typically playing the online shooter types, like these sorts of things. Most average players are not like us who want to care about all of the little weeds in everything. The average player doesn't care about if the new Call of Duty game sucks that much, or if Odyssey strays away from the lore of Assassin's Creed, because for the most part, they don't even care about the overall stories being told, so why does it matter? However, on the other end of this, you have people reaping the rewards from the likes of From Software, who actually decided to go all out on the core fan base and the Souls fans, giving them an actual open world experience with Elden Ring. Yes, they might have dumbed down on many parts of the game for the casual player to play, however, all round this game is built to be the Souls fans' amazing open world, and you can't really knock this company for the fact that they decided to go with, you know what, we're doubling down on what we know and what we know our customers love, and instead of doing what, Assassin's Creed did, where they chased the money with From Software, they kind of created something and they cultivated slowly a bigger and bigger audience. They found their money effectively. They found their audience and started cultivating it more, whereas with the likes of Ubisoft, they kind of chase audiences instead. I think we do need new games coming out, but sadly, I think this is only going to be coming within the form of the indie genre, as they're really the only ones who can take the massive risk, as they don't have massive overhead to be paying out. They don't have to take the risky bets of if their game doesn't work out. Whereas a company like Rockstar can't spend 5 years developing a game that might not even work out, and then end up piling loads and loads of money into it because it could flop, as this is just not a good idea. The time and the revenue splits by the end just wouldn't work out in anyone's favour. So overall, they're not going to change anything. Most big studios aren't going to change anything, so if we want to lean into what is going to be general change, then the indie community is what is going to have to be looked at, or we have to lower our expectations going into new games. I do think we're in a good time though for gaming. We might have these issues and more depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go down, but they don't destroy everything we have coming out, and especially what has also been released in recent memory. In the last video I did talk quite positively about 8 games in particular, which was RDR2, Spider-Man, God of War, Elden Ring, Jedi Fallen Order, Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and It Takes Two. But I want to give some credit to a few newer games that have come out, and the ones that I've heard some good things for, but also adding on top of that, the ones that I'm more hopeful for moving forward. The first on this list of more recent games to come out has to be Jedi Survivor. I've obviously heard tons around the controversies around this game, and I've personally experienced firsthand many of the FPS issues, but outside of this, I don't think the game is bad in any way. It's really good, really great fun, and if you love Star Wars, you're probably going to love the game. Fundamentally, it does what everyone loved about the first game and then added extra improvements, but didn't go out of its way to be outlandishly different. All round, this game is what it should be, an improvement on its predecessor, and this is how sequels always should be, an improvement on the original. Tears of the Kingdom recently also came out, and I've heard plenty of positive things. I first need to play Breath of the Wild before I even consider it. Going from a game though that before launch people were complaining constantly about the fact that it wasn't going to be 60 FPS, and the recent opinions on Breath of the Wild that I've heard when it comes to it not being that good. However, From what I've seen, a lot of people are generally really happy with the game and think that it's very good, and I can't wait to see what it's like for myself eventually. Another one as well that I did get a lot of people recommending to me that I've played a little bit. I've played 5 hours of Kingdom Come Deliverance back in 2019. However, I then went away on holiday and then it kind of just went into my backlog of playing and I just never bothered with it. I do want to go replay it and I will do at some point. However, I've got a lot of other things that I'm working on and other videos that I want to work on for this channel. So right now, it's definitely on the back burner for probably like next year. But yeah, I've heard plenty of good things. I've played the game for a little bit, obviously not tons. And from that little experience, I knew that it was a good game. 100% I would recommend it. It's just definitely scratching the itch of a good open world game. It looks good as well when you consider that it came from a studio that I don't believe was wildly well known. Hogwarts Legacy is also another game that came out this year and has done amazingly well, even with the controversies surrounding the game. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you're going to probably enjoy this. You ended up seeing Harry Potter fans for the first time in ages get a genuine chance to enjoy a game purely made for them, which really hasn't happened in a long time. Obviously, you've got some that are based off of the films and books, but all round, they weren't exactly like this, where they are a full open world experience where you just kind of get to freely explore however you would like. You also have God of War Ragnarok, which was received really well, selling amazingly well, and I believe being one of the best selling Sony games, I believe, off launch. I believe so anyway. But again, like Jedi Survivor, this game is what a sequel should be. It was literally what the first game was, expanded on it, and did a good job of just kind of keeping the audience there for the ride. Then you have Animal Crossing New Horizons, which I was surprised that I didn't mention in the first video, as that along with Warzone were like the only two things I was playing and doing during lockdown, or at least the first one in the UK. I ended up sinking tons of time into it, and in my opinion, it's the pinnacle of Animal Crossing for me, and I can't wait to see when they release their next game, as to be honest, I kind of want to play an Animal Crossing game again, and I've already played that one through, and I can't be asked really to actually sink tons of time into it until there's a new one out. We also have some games that are in the works right now and should hopefully be coming out in 2023, with the likes of Spider-Man 2, Starfield, and Assassin's Creed Mirage. All of them are games that I'm really looking forward to, Spider-Man 2 being one of the ones that, honestly, I really want to just jump back into that world, and I've been hyped to get into that game again. I played the first one again for the channel about a year and a half ago, and I probably will replay it at some point soon. Just one, I could make a video out of it, but secondly, I just want to replay it so that when the second game comes out, I can just be freshly available just to jump straight into it. Starfield is one that I'm also super excited to see what they end up doing, as this is the first time that Bethesda is actually giving us a proper game within the realms of their development space since Fallout 4. Yes, people will say, oh well, 76, but there's a difference between 76 and what they normally do. All round as well, this game is a new IP, so it'll be very interesting to see what they do when it comes to a new thing all round. But for me, fundamentally, why I'm actually interested in this game is just to see what we might be looking at when it comes to the quality of a game when it gets to Elder Scrolls 6. And then lastly, we've got Assassin's Creed Mirage, which I am on the fence of, and obviously I said during this video a few things around like how we shouldn't be hyped for it based off 5 minutes of leaked footage. All round, I am still interested. I am hoping it is what they're saying it is. I just can't take Ubisoft, to be honest, at their word after the last few games. But all round, I'm not nihilistic towards this game. I do think that we will hopefully get what is promised, and yeah, we'll just see what it ends up being. I will get it on launch, and I'll hopefully enjoy it as well. I'm really excited about the future of gaming, especially with the likes of the Unreal Engine 5 being released, and how much that's going to allow like indie creators to make great looking games, and at the same time make games that are within what they want to be creating. It opens it up so much more for competition that's going to make a lot of these bigger companies actually have to think about making higher quality games. I do have high hopes moving forward, but mainly because of one thing, which is what I've already kind of spoken about in previous videos, but is more importantly around the fact that companies such as Activision, Bethesda, Ubisoft, EA, and Rockstar have heard a lot of criticism levied against them or against other companies, and they're kind of on thin ice within the online community, which has kind of led the likes of EA going from an anti-single player games company to now having published 2 games recently that have done really well. With Rockstar knowing that there's a ton of pressure on them to release GTA 6 and make it good, Ubisoft trying to rekindle some essence of their original fan base that they've lost over the last few years, and Activision seeing sales decrease over on PlayStation for the new Call of Duty, are all signs that companies are going to have to start entering the real world and what people actually think of it, instead of kind of what the last decade has been, where consumers kind of pay for whatever's in front of them instead of thinking before paying. I am very hopeful moving forward for gaming, and all round I am hopeful for just the future of the next few games that we get in the next few years. This year's already been quite good, so yeah, I can't really complain so far this year. Yeah, I think Forspoken is like a big L so far. Then it comes to like a big release that was talked about. But all around, Hogwarts Legacy came out, that's been a big hit. Star Wars Jedi Survivor came out, big hit. And then you've got the new Zelda game, again, a massive hit and has done really well. So again, it's looking good. It's looking good moving forward, so I can't complain. That is it for the entire video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. I wanted to leave it off with a bit more of a positive note. Last time I did spend 15 minutes, even though a lot of people try to say like the entire video of a 30-minute video was like purely negative. I did spend 15 minutes like being fairly positive in my opinion anyway. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to leave a like, do subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Like I said, I do have a Patreon where you can see early access to videos like this, channel, and active Q&As, that sort of thing. So yeah, if you want to check that out, it'll be down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.